The colony square was full of noise, smells, and laughter, but the laughter was not kind. It rose higher as the alien girl stood in the center, her body shaking, her face pale. She had been forced onto a raised stone platform, surrounded by her own people. They carried buckets filled with scraps of spoiled food, broken glass, and rotting garbage. She hugged herself, trembling, knowing what was about to happen. Her people shouted words of shame at her, calling her useless, unclean, and unworthy. Every word cut deeper than any blade could. The first bucket was thrown. Rotten fruit splattered against her head, sliding down her shoulders. The crowd cheered. Another bucket came. Burnt bones, sticky grease, moldy bread. It covered her body, clinging to her skin. Her clothes, already thin and torn, were pulled away from her, ripped by laughing hands until only rags remained. The girl gasped and tried to hide herself, but they jeered louder, pointing at her as if her shame was a kind of entertainment. Children of the colony threw pebbles and shouted. Some of the adults spat on the ground near her, refusing to even look at her as if she was beneath them. She wanted to cry, but even her tears felt stolen by the eyes watching her. The worst part was not the filth or the hunger. It was that every face she once knew was now a mask of cruelty. No one in that crowd saw her as a living soul. She was nothing more than a joke, a body to be humiliated. She tried to cover herself with her hands, curling down to make herself small, but a man kicked her leg and forced her upright again. "Stand!" he shouted. "Face what you are!" The others clapped, laughing at her pain. Her knees burned from the rough stone, her body sticky with waste, her skin marked by shame. She wished for the ground to open and swallow her whole. But not everyone in the square was laughing. From the shadows of a half-broken wall, a man stood watching. He was not one of them. His skin, his build, and his eyes gave him away. He was human. He had been living in the colony quietly, working, trading, never drawing attention. Yet now his fists were clenched. His jaw tightened as he saw the cruelty unfold before him. He had been warned not to interfere in alien matters. He had been told humans were fragile in this world, powerless, tolerated only as workers. But what he saw filled his chest with fire. Another bucket landed on her. This time it was ash and soot, clouding around her head, making her cough and choke. The crowd laughed harder at the sound. She staggered and almost fell. One of the young men grabbed what was left of her rags and tore them fully away. A wave of laughter shook the square as the girl stood frozen, her body bare, covered only in filth. Her eyes shut tight, her breath caught in her throat. She felt no wind, no light, no life left in her. The human watching could not move at first. His mind screamed at him, "Step back, turn away, survive." But his heart shouted louder. He took one step forward, then another, his boots heavy on the stone. No one noticed him yet. The crowd was too busy enjoying her humiliation. He pulled the cloak from his shoulders. His hands shook, not from fear of the aliens, but from anger so deep it made his whole body tremble. The girl's ears caught the sound of footsteps different from the others. They were slower, heavier, carrying something strange, purpose. She opened her eyes just a little. Through her tears, she saw him, a man unlike the others, a man with eyes that did not hold mockery. His gaze was sharp, filled with something she had never seen before in her life. Pity, no, defiance. The laughter began to die when the human reached the center. Whispers started in the crowd. A human, here, walking toward her? They looked at each other in confusion. Some muttered, some frowned, but no one stepped forward to stop him yet. His presence itself was like a stone thrown into still water, making waves no one expected. He took the last step and stood in front of her. For a moment, everything slowed. The girl blinked, uncertain if this was a dream. His hand reached out, not to strike, not to shame, but to drape the cloak gently over her trembling shoulders. It was warm, heavy, and smelled faintly of smoke and leather. She gasped, clutching it tight around herself, her body shaking not from shame now, but from shock. The square was silent. The people stared, unsure how to react. A human protecting her? A human covering what they had worked so hard to expose? Anger started bubbling in their whispers. How dare he? He has no right. This is not his matter. But the human said nothing. His eyes scanned the crowd, daring them silently. His hand rested protectively on the cloak as the girl hid behind him. For the first time since the cruel punishment began, she felt the smallest spark inside her chest. Not hope, not yet, but the faint memory of what hope used to feel like. The silence of the square grew dangerous. The human could feel the tension in the air, the stares that carried both fear and hatred. But he did not step back. He stood tall, a single figure against the many. Behind him, the girl curled into the cloak, her body shaking, but her eyes never leaving his back. The crowd was no longer laughing. They had no words, only the bitter realization that one human had just done what none of them had dared to do. See her as someone worth protecting. The human's hand stayed firm on her shoulder as he guided her down from the stone platform. The cloak wrapped around her body, covering her from the hungry eyes of the crowd. She kept her head low, her hands clutching the cloth so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Every step felt heavy, as if the ground itself wanted to swallow her again, but his presence kept her moving. The people whispered louder now, their voices sharp, their words poisonous. Some shouted that he was breaking their laws. Others laughed bitterly, saying the human was a fool to risk himself for someone so worthless. The human ignored them all. His eyes never left the path ahead, his jaw set hard. The girl tried to speak, her lips trembling, but no words came. Her throat was dry from the ash, and her heart still beat too fast. He glanced at her once, only for a second, and she caught something in his gaze. Patience, not pity. It felt strange to her. She had never seen eyes that carried no hatred when looking at her. When they reached the edge of the square, 2 colony guards stepped forward, their weapons low but their stance tense. The human stopped, his cloak brushing against the dusty ground. The crowd hushed, waiting to see if the guards would act. One of them spoke, his voice heavy with contempt. "This is alien business. Step aside, human. Leave her." The girl stiffened, ready for him to push her forward, to let go, to obey. It was the way of things. Humans in the colony had no power. They obeyed or they vanished. But instead, the man moved his arm slightly, pulling the cloak tighter around her, keeping her close. His reply was calm, but his tone was steel. "She's with me now." The words shocked her more than the garbage ever had. She looked up at him, eyes wide. With him? The guards sneered, shifting their grips on their weapons, but the human did not flinch. He stood tall, his body forming a wall between her and them. For the first time in her life, someone claimed her as if she mattered, as if her safety was worth defiance. The guards exchanged glances. They could not strike yet, not in front of the whole crowd. The rules of the colony were cruel but bound in ceremony. Punishments were public, but so were challenges. If they attacked without order, they risked losing their authority. So they stepped aside, muttering threats under their breath. The human led her forward again, each step taking her farther from the square of shame. Behind them, the whispers of the crowd grew into angry voices. Some cursed him, others laughed, betting how long before the guards hunted him down. A few stayed silent, their eyes uncertain, troubled by what they had just seen. The girl heard it all, every word cutting into her. But stronger than the noise was the feel of the cloak around her and the steady hand that kept her moving. They turned into a narrow street between tall stone walls. The smell of garbage was weaker here, replaced by smoke and metal. The noise of the crowd faded behind them, though the girl knew it would never be gone. Her people would not forget this moment. Neither would she. Her legs trembled, and she stumbled once. Without a word, the man slowed, steadying her with his arm. She wanted to ask why. Why was he helping her? Why risk his own life for someone everyone despised? But her mouth refused to open. Shame was still heavy on her tongue, and fear locked her voice. She lowered her head again, letting the cloak shield her, but her mind kept circling around the question. They passed into the outskirts of the colony, where the walls were cracked and the streets broken. Few people walked here, and those who did kept their distance. The human finally stopped beside a doorway, hidden in the shadow of an abandoned shop. He looked around carefully, scanning for followers. Satisfied, he guided her inside. The room smelled of dust and rust, but it was quiet. There were no eyes, no laughter, no stones to strike her. She stood frozen near the doorway, afraid to step farther. He walked to a broken shelf and pulled out a small water flask. Without a word, he held it out to her. Her hands shook as she took it. The first sip burned her throat, but it was sweet compared to the taste of ash. She drank more, greedily, until it was gone. He watched silently, his expression unreadable. She lowered the flask, her eyes flicking toward him nervously. Finally, she found her voice. though it was weak. Why? The single word barely escaped her lips, but it carried everything: her confusion, her disbelief, her fear. He answered simply, as if it needed no thought. Because no one else did. Her chest tightened. She clutched the cloak tighter, staring at him as if he had spoken in a forgotten language. The words made no sense to her. In her world, no one ever helped without a reason. No one ever stood for her unless they wanted something in return. Yet here was a human, a stranger, breaking every rule just to keep her safe. The silence stretched, heavy, but not cruel. She lowered her head, her hair falling in front of her face, hiding the tears she could not hold back. For the first time, her tears did not feel like weakness. They felt like release. She did not sob aloud, but her shoulders shook, and the cloak absorbed her trembling. He did not move closer, did not press her with questions. He only stood nearby, keeping watch as if daring the world to try again. Outside, faint footsteps echoed in the distance. The guards were searching. The human's body tensed, his hand drifting toward the blade at his belt. He glanced at her, his eyes serious. "We can't stay here. They'll come." Her heart jumped in fear. But when he held out his hand, she did not hesitate. Slowly, carefully, she placed her small hand in his. His grip was steady, firm, unshakable. For the first time since the humiliation began, she felt something new crawling into her chest, something she barely remembered: safety. He opened the door again, leading her into the shadows of the alleyways. The night air was cold, but the cloak was warm. She followed him closely, her steps uncertain but no longer broken. The colony whispered and plotted against them, but for this moment she was not alone. The night grew darker as they slipped through the narrow alleys, the girl clutching the cloak around her body, her bare feet silent on the cracked stone. The human walked ahead with careful steps, always glancing over his shoulder, his ears sharp to every sound. The colony was restless now. The whispers had spread, and the guards would not let such defiance go unpunished. Somewhere in the distance, the heavy boots of soldiers echoed against the walls. The girl's heart raced. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow felt like an enemy ready to drag her back to the square. They turned into a wider street where flickering lamps lit the way. At once, voices rang out. 2 guards had spotted them from across the road. "There!" one shouted, raising his weapon. The girl froze, her breath caught in her chest. The human grabbed her wrist and pulled her into a side passage. Their footsteps thundered through the narrow stone corridor, and the soldiers shouting behind them, their boots striking faster. The girl stumbled, almost falling, but the human caught her before she hit the ground. "Run," he whispered, his voice firm but low. She obeyed, forcing her tired legs to move, the cloak dragging behind her. They darted through twisting turns, deeper into the forgotten parts of the colony. The air grew thick with the smell of rust, oil, and old smoke. Broken pipes hissed, dripping water into puddles that splashed under their feet. The shouts grew louder. More guards had joined the chase. Torches burned in the streets behind them, and the glint of weapons flashed through the dark. The human pulled her behind a crumbling wall, pressing her against the cold stone. He placed a finger to his lips, urging her to stay silent. Her chest heaved as she tried to hold her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the guards would hear it. The soldiers ran past, their heavy boots rattling the ground. For a moment, it seemed they had escaped, but then one of the torches swung back, its flame lighting the alley. A guard shouted, "They're here!" The sound of running feet thundered toward them again. The human swore under his breath, grabbing her hand once more. This time, they didn't run straight. He dragged her through a gap in the wall into a long, dark tunnel that smelled of dust and iron. The tunnel sloped downward, deeper and deeper under the colony. The girl stumbled in the dark, her fear rising with every step. "Where are we going?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Somewhere they won't follow," he answered, though his eyes were sharp with worry. The tunnel opened into an old maintenance chamber. Broken machines lay scattered, their gears rusting, their wires hanging loose. The girl shivered as her bare feet touched the cold floor. The human guided her to a corner, shielding her with his body as the sound of the guards filled the tunnel entrance. Torches lit the walls, shadows dancing across the stone. The human crouched low, pulling her down with him. His arms stayed around her shoulders, steadying her trembling frame. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, fast, but strong. His hand moved to the knife strapped at his side, ready if they were discovered. The girl buried her face into the cloak, wishing she could disappear. The guards entered the chamber, their lights sweeping across the ruins of machines. "They came this way," one growled. Another kicked a rusted pipe, the sound echoing like thunder. "Search everywhere!" The girl's body stiffened. She held her breath, her hands clutching the cloak so tightly it hurt. The human's arm pressed her closer to the shadows, his eyes unblinking as he tracked every movement of the soldiers. The flicker of torchlight moved across the floor, closer and closer to their hiding place. One guard stopped only a few steps away, the firelight glowing against the human's face. The girl's eyes widened, panic rising inside her chest. She thought it was over. She thought they would be dragged back to the square, and the cloak ripped away, her shame returning. Her lips parted to cry out, but before a sound escaped, the human's hand gently covered her mouth. His touch was firm, not cruel, silently begging her to stay strong. His eyes met hers in the dark, steady, calm, and certain. The guard turned, shouting at another soldier, then stomped away. The torchlight moved with him. The girl felt her chest shake as she released the breath she had been holding. Slowly, the chamber emptied, the soldier's footsteps fading into the distance. Only silence remained, broken by the drip of water from the pipes. The human lowered his hand, his expression still hard. "We can't stay long," he murmured. She nodded weakly, her voice trapped in her throat. Her body ached, her legs trembling from exhaustion, but her heart was filled with a strange warmth she could not understand. They left the chamber, slipping into another tunnel that rose upward. The air grew colder, and faint moonlight shone through cracks in the walls. They emerged into the outskirts of the colony, where the buildings were abandoned and falling apart. No guards patrolled here. No one cared about these ruins. The girl sank to the ground, pulling the cloak tight around her. She was shaking still, but not from cold alone. She looked at the human, who scanned the streets carefully before finally sitting near her. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his eyes remained sharp, always watching. She studied him in silence, her mind tangled with questions. Why did he stay? Why did he risk everything for her? She had seen humans before, but never like this. He had no power here, yet he had stood against her own people without hesitation. Her lips parted, and her voice came out soft, almost fragile. "You could have left me." He turned his head, meeting her eyes. His answer was quiet but firm. "I couldn't." The words struck her heart like a blow, leaving her breathless. She lowered her gaze, hiding behind the cloak again. But this time, her tears were different. They were not born of shame, but of something else, something she could not name yet. The guards were still hunting. The danger was not over, but in that moment, in the shadows of the ruins, the alien girl knew one truth. She was not alone anymore. The night was quiet inside the abandoned warehouse where they had taken shelter. Broken windows let in streams of pale moonlight that painted long shadows across the floor. Dust floated in the air, and the silence was broken only by the distant howl of wind through cracks in the walls. The girl sat in the corner, wrapped tightly in the cloak, her knees pulled up against her chest. The human sat a few steps away, sharpening a small blade against a piece of stone, his eyes never fully leaving the doorway. For a long time, neither spoke. The girl's body trembled, not only from cold, but from the weight of everything that had happened. She stared at the ground, replaying the humiliation in the square, the garbage, the cruel laughter. Her people's voices still echoed in her mind, each insult cutting like a fresh wound. Finally, she whispered, her voice barely above the sound of the wind. "They will never stop. You should not have helped me." The human looked up at her, his face calm but serious. "If I had walked away, would you still be alive right now?" Her lips parted, but she could not answer. Deep inside, she knew the truth. Without him, she would not only have been broken by the shame, but perhaps beaten until nothing of her remained. Her silence was her answer, and the man nodded slightly before turning his gaze back to the blade. After another long pause, the girl slowly pulled the cloak aside, revealing a mark on her shoulder. It was faint in the moonlight, but clear enough to see, a symbol burned into her skin, sharp lines forming a crest that shimmered faintly against her flesh. The human's eyes narrowed as he recognized it, though he said nothing at first. Her voice shook as she spoke again. "This is why they hate me. This is why they humiliated me. She touched the mark with trembling fingers. I was born carrying this brand. It belongs to the high caste, the ruling bloodline of the colony. But my mother was not one of them. She was a servant. Her union with one of their nobles was forbidden, and when they found out, they cast her away. When I was born, they could not deny the blood in me, but they refused to accept me. To them, I am nothing but a shameful reminder of broken law. Her words cracked as she continued. They call me cursed, unclean, a stain that must be hidden. That is why they strip me. That is why they cover me in filth. They want to erase me, but this mark, it proves I exist. The human studied her carefully. He had heard whispers of the colony's caste system before, but seeing it carved into her very skin, he finally understood the cruelty. So you are connected to the rulers, he said slowly, and they would rather destroy you than admit the truth. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. If they knew I was alive, if they saw me with you, they would kill us both. The human's jaw tightened. He placed the blade aside and leaned closer, his voice steady. Then let them come. I won't hand you over. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at him in disbelief. You don't understand. Protecting me means defying the entire caste. They will hunt you, torture you, destroy you. No human has ever survived crossing their laws. He held her gaze, unflinching. I'm already guilty for saving you once. Whether it's 1 step or 100, the path is the same. I won't stop halfway. The girl's chest tightened, her heart racing at his words. No one had ever spoken like this before, not for her. All her life, she had been treated as less than nothing. And here was a man, an outsider, a human, willing to stand against an empire for her. It made no sense. It terrified her, yet it warmed her in a way she had never felt before. She pulled the cloak tighter, lowering her head. I don't want you to die because of me. His reply was simple. Then live because of me. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. Outside, the sound of boots echoed faintly. The guards were still searching, their voices carrying across the night. The girl's body tensed, fear returning to her veins. She looked at him, her voice trembling. They are close, he nodded. They know you are more than what they called you. That's why they won't stop. He leaned against the wall, listening carefully to the sounds outside. But they don't know one thing. She blinked, her voice soft. What? He looked at her, his eyes sharp, his tone unwavering. That I won't let them touch you again. Her throat tightened, and she bit her lip, holding back the sob that rose in her chest. She wanted to argue, to tell him it was hopeless, but the words would not come. Instead, she pressed the cloak to her face, muffling the sound of her tears. The human shifted, moving closer but not too close, his presence steady beside her. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, not pressing, just enough to remind her she was not alone. Rest, he said softly. You'll need your strength. Her body shook with exhaustion. Slowly, against the cold stone wall, her eyes began to close. Sleep was fragile, broken by nightmares, but whenever she stirred in fear, she saw him still there, watching the door, knife in hand, shoulders strong and unyielding. In the quiet darkness of that broken warehouse, the girl realized something she had never allowed herself to believe. She was no longer just a forgotten outcast marked for shame. Someone had chosen to stand for her. Someone had given her a place, even if it was only in the shadows of the night. And for the first time in her life, she dared to think that maybe, just maybe, she was worth saving. The morning light crept into the cracks of the ruined warehouse, washing the floor with pale gold. The girl opened her eyes slowly, her body stiff from sleeping on cold stone. For a moment she thought the night had been a dream, that the cloak around her shoulders was just her imagination. But then she saw him, the human, still sitting near the doorway, his back straight, his eyes sharp even in his tiredness. He had not slept. He had watched the entire night. She sat up, pulling the cloak tighter. Her stomach growled faintly, but she ignored it. Hunger was not new to her. What was new was the strange feeling in her chest, a feeling of safety, fragile but real. The human glanced at her, and his voice came quiet, steady. You should eat. She shook her head, confused. There was no food here. But then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a small piece of dried bread. He broke it in half and handed the larger piece to her. She stared at it, unsure if she should take it. No one had ever given her food before, without expecting something in return. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, taking it slowly. She whispered, "Why?" He did not answer with words this time. He only gave a faint shrug, as if it did not matter to him, as if giving was as natural as breathing. She ate the bread in silence, her eyes lowering so he could not see her tears. Outside, the sound of horns echoed across the colony. Both of them stiffened. The girl's hands tightened on the cloak, her face paling. She knew the sound. It was the signal of a hunt. The guards had spread the command. Every outpost, every patrol, every soldier would now search for them. She whispered, her voice shaking. "They are coming. They will never stop." The human stood, sliding the knife into his belt, his eyes narrowing. "Then we keep moving." They left the warehouse quickly, slipping back into the maze of alleys. The streets were more dangerous now. Patrols marched in groups of 4, their armor clanking, their weapons ready. Posters had been nailed to the walls, marked with rough sketches, one of the girl's branded shoulder and one of the human's face. The ink was bold and the words clear, "Wanted alive." The girl stared at her own picture, her chest heavy with dread. She whispered, "They will take you too. You are marked because of me." He tore the poster down and let it fall into the mud. His voice was calm but sharp. "Then we'll give them a chase they won't forget." They moved quickly, using narrow passages to avoid the main roads. The human knew the colony's underbelly well. He led her through old markets where broken stalls stood empty, through ruined storage yards filled with rusted machines, and into half-buried tunnels that stank of smoke and mold. The girl followed closely, always clutching the cloak, her body pressed against his shadow. But their path was not safe forever. By midday, the sound of boots returned, louder this time. A patrol spotted them near the edge of a broken courtyard. "There!" one of the guards shouted, raising his weapon. More soldiers poured in from the other side, blocking their escape. The girl's legs froze, fear locking her in place. She could already imagine being dragged back, stripped again, mocked, grasped, and beaten until nothing was left of her dignity. But before despair could swallow her, the human stepped forward. His body blocked her from the soldiers, his hand gripping the knife tightly. His voice cut through the noise like steel. "She stays with me?" The guards laughed at his defiance. One sneered, "A human against us? You should crawl instead of speak." They advanced slowly, their weapons glowing with faint light. The girl tugged on the human's cloak, whispering desperately, "Please, we should run. You cannot fight them." He glanced at her for only a second, and in that second she saw no fear in his eyes. "If we run forever, they win. Sometimes you have to stand." The soldiers lunged forward. The human reacted first, striking one across the face with the hilt of his knife. The man fell back, his weapon clattering to the ground. The girl gasped, frozen by the sudden violence. Another soldier swung his blade, but the human ducked low and drove his shoulder into the guard's chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The fight was brutal and quick. The human was only one man, but his movements were sharp and filled with purpose. He fought not for pride, not for glory, but for the trembling girl hiding behind him. Each strike he made was a promise. She would not be taken again. The girl pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. She had never seen such courage. The guards were stronger, larger, and trained. But the human fought with something different, something raw and unstoppable. When the last soldier fell to the ground, groaning in pain, the human grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her away before reinforcements could arrive. They ran again, their breaths heavy, the sounds of alarm bells rising behind them. The colony had seen what happened, and the hunt would only grow fiercer. They fled into the tunnels beneath the industrial sector. The air was damp and thick, filled with dripping water and the hiss of steam pipes. The girl's body shook from exhaustion, but she forced herself to keep going, her hand gripping his tightly. She whispered between breaths, "Why do you fight for me? You could escape if you left me." His voice came steady, even while running. "Because they want you broken, and I don't leave people broken." Her chest ached at his words. She had no answer. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was like to be worth saving, worth standing for. She clutched the cloak tighter and ran beside him, her fear slowly mixing with something new, trust. Trust. When they finally stopped, hidden in the shadows of the tunnels, both of them were panting hard. The girl sank to the ground, her body weak, but her eyes were shining in the dim light. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized something that made her breath catch. Her people had called her cursed, worthless, a stain. Yet here was a human who had turned against an entire colony to keep her safe. And in his eyes, she was not filth, not shame. She was someone worth every step, every risk, every fight. For the first time in her life, she felt a fire burning inside her chest. Not of fear, but of strength slowly awakening. She was not alone anymore, and maybe she never would be again. The marketplace was alive with noise when they finally emerged from the tunnels. Stalls lined the square, selling everything from strange glowing fruits to rusted weapons. The air was thick with voices bargaining, children running, and merchants shouting their prices. To any ordinary eye, it looked like a normal day. But for the girl and the human, every sound carried danger. Every glance felt like a threat. The girl pulled the cloak tighter around her body, her face hidden beneath its hood. Her heart pounded as they walked through the crowd. She could feel eyes sliding toward her, searching, guessing. The posters with her brand and his face were already nailed to some of the wooden posts around the market. Every step forward was a risk. The human walked beside her, calm but sharp, his hand never far from the knife at his belt. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for guards. He whispered without turning his head, "Stay close. Don't look at anyone." She nodded quickly, pressing herself against his side, her small hand clutching the cloak near her neck. For a few moments, it seemed they might pass through unnoticed. The noise of trade was louder than whispers, and the crowd was thick enough to hide them. But then a voice rang out, loud and cruel. "There! That's them!" The crowd parted as a group of soldiers pushed their way forward. Their armor gleamed, and the insignia of the ruling caste burned on their chests. The leader pointed at the human and the girl, his face twisted with contempt. "By order of the colony, surrender now. The girl is property of the caste. The human is guilty of defiance." The market fell silent. Merchants stopped shouting. Children froze where they stood. All eyes turned toward the human and the girl. Whispers spread quickly. Some faces showed anger, others fear, but no one stepped forward to help. The girl's body went cold. Her knees felt weak. She lowered her head and whispered, "It's over. I can't let you fight them all." The human didn't move. He placed his arm in front of her, shielding her from the soldiers, his voice steady and unshaken. "You are not property, and I don't surrender." The commander laughed, his voice echoing through the marketplace. "You dare to stand against us? You are nothing but a human laborer. Step aside, or we will crush you where you stand." The girl trembled behind him, her heart tearing. She wanted to beg him to stop, to save himself, but her voice was trapped by fear. The human, however, did not flinch. His stance was strong, his eyes blazing with a fire she had never seen before. He raised his voice, loud enough for the entire market to hear. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." A gasp rippled through the crowd. No one had ever seen such defiance from a human. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons, anger burning in their eyes. The commander stepped forward, his blade drawn, his voice sharp as steel. "Then you will die with her." The soldiers advanced, their boots striking the stone in rhythm. The girl's chest tightened until she could barely breathe. Her people had always mocked humans as weak, fragile, unworthy of standing in battle. But here, in the middle of the marketplace, she saw one man facing an entire squad without stepping back. The first soldier lunged, swinging his weapon. The human moved quickly, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the blade clattered to the ground. He struck with the hilt of his knife, sending the soldier crashing into a stall of fruits that spilled across the ground. The crowd gasped. Two more rushed him at once. The girl cried out, but the human spun low, using their momentum against them. One fell hard onto the stones, and the other was shoved back into the crowd. His movements were raw and fast, filled not with polished skill, but with desperation and courage. He fought not for glory, but to keep the cloak around her shoulders safe. The commander growled and raised his blade high, charging forward. The human braced himself, but before the strike could land, something unexpected happened. A voice from the crowd shouted, "Stop this madness!" Another voice followed, "She's just a girl." The whispers grew louder. The crowd had seen her humiliation, had laughed at her pain, but now they watched a human risk his life for her, and shame began to spread through them. Some of the merchants stepped closer, forming a loose wall between the girl and the guards. They did not attack, but their presence alone made the soldiers hesitate. The commander's eyes widened with fury. "You dare protect them? She is a stain. He is a traitor." But the market no longer felt the same. The human stood tall, blood dripping from a cut on his arm, his chest rising with heavy breaths. The girl peeked out from behind him, her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she saw her people hesitate. They looked at each other, uncomfortable, unsure. A single human had shown more courage than all of them combined, and it broke something inside their silence. The commander snarled, realizing the crowd was slipping from his control. He spat on the ground and signaled his men to retreat. "This isn't finished. The caste will not forget this." With that, the soldiers withdrew, their armor clanking as they vanished into the streets. The market remained silent for a moment longer. Then the whispers grew again, but they were different now. No laughter, no jeers, only uneasy respect. The girl stood frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. The human turned to her, his expression calm despite the blood on his face. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You're safe, for now." Her lips trembled as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She clutched the cloak and whispered, "Why do you keep standing for me?" He answered simply, his voice like iron, "Because no one else will." In that moment, surrounded by silence and stares, the girl understood something she had never known. Dignity could be stolen, her body could be shamed, but as long as one person stood beside her, she could not be erased. And this human, against all odds, had given her that truth. The marketplace returned to life slowly, but its people would never forget what they had seen. A human standing before soldiers, defying the law, protecting a girl everyone else had thrown away. It was no longer just her story of humiliation. It had become his story of defiance. And together, it was becoming a legend. The sun was sinking low, painting the colony sky in shades of red and gold. The human and the girl moved quickly through the narrow streets, but the sound of horns echoed once more, louder, angrier than before. The ruling caste had been shamed in front of the people, and now they wanted blood. Soldiers poured into the streets, their boots like thunder against the stone. The girl clung to the cloak around her body, her breath fast and shallow. She whispered, "They won't stop until they kill us both." The human's jaw tightened. His steps were steady, his eyes scanning for escape, but the sound of pursuit closed in from every side. They reached the edge of the market square just as more guards appeared, cutting off their path. Behind them, another group closed in. They were surrounded. The girl's heart sank. She felt the same cold shame return, the memory of garbage and laughter, the weight of being called nothing. She stepped forward, pulling the cloak tight, ready to surrender. "If I go back, maybe they will spare you," she whispered. The human caught her wrist, pulling her back behind him. His voice was sharp, filled with fire. "Don't you dare. You are not theirs to break." The commander of the guards stepped forward, his armor gleaming, his face twisted with rage. "You shame our laws, human. You stand in the way of justice. Hand her over now, or your death will be slow." The human didn't move. He stood tall, a single figure against dozens, his body shielding the trembling girl. His voice rang across the square, strong and unshaken. "Justice? You call stripping a girl and throwing filth on her justice? You call cruelty strength? If that is your law, then your law is nothing." The crowd had gathered again, drawn by the horns and shouts. Faces lined the edges of the square, watching in silence. Many of them had mocked the girl before, had thrown stones or laughed at her shame. But now they saw something none of them could deny. A human standing alone against the entire guard, refusing to step aside. His courage was like a spark thrown into dry grass. The silence of the crowd began to shift. Whispers spread like fire. The commander sneered, raising his sword high. "Then you will die with her." The soldiers surged forward. The human moved fast, slamming his shoulder into the first man, twisting his blade away. He fought with fury, each strike sharp, each movement filled with the strength of someone who had nothing to lose. He bled, but he did not fall. The girl watched with wide eyes, her hands pressed to her mouth. Every blow he took, every slash he dodged, was for her. The crowd gasped as the fight grew brutal. The human was only one, yet he stood like a wall, cutting down soldier after soldier. The commander's voice roared over the chaos. "Kill him! Leave the girl alive for the caste!" The girl's heart broke at those words. She could not watch him die for her. Her voice, weak but trembling with new strength, rang out across the square. Stop! He fights because you would not. He stands because you turned your backs. Look at yourselves, so proud, yet none of you had the courage he has. The crowd stirred. People looked at each other, shame flickering in their eyes. For years they had accepted cruelty as law, had turned away from injustice, had mocked the weak. And now a human, an outsider, showed them what it meant to stand for someone. The human fell to one knee, blood dripping from his arm, but he forced himself up again. He struck down another guard, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The girl cried out, rushing forward, clutching his arm to keep him from falling. She turned to the crowd, her eyes blazing through her tears. If he falls, then we are all nothing. If you have any honor, stand with him. The words cracked the silence. Slowly, a man stepped forward from the crowd, then another. Merchants, workers, even mothers holding children moved closer. They formed a wall behind the human, their eyes steady now. The commander froze in disbelief. "You dare?" he shouted. One of the men answered, his voice strong. "We dare because he showed us how." The soldiers faltered, their strength wavering against the sudden unity. The commander snarled, but he saw the truth. The people had turned. He could not fight the entire square. His blade shook with rage, but he spat on the ground and signaled retreat. This is not the end. The caste will return. The guards pulled back, their armor clanking as they vanished into the streets. The horns faded, leaving only the quiet murmurs of the crowd. The human stood, breathing hard, his body wounded but unbroken. The girl helped him steady himself, her hands gentle but firm. The crowd did not mock her now. They did not look at her with disgust. Instead, their eyes held something new, respect. Some even lowered their heads in shame, unable to meet her gaze. The girl clutched the cloak tighter, her heart racing. She whispered to the human, "They see me differently now." He gave a faint, tired smile. "No, they see you as you truly are." Tears blurred her vision, but this time they were not tears of shame. She turned toward the crowd, her voice soft but strong. "You called me filth, you called me cursed, but this man, this human, saw me as more. He gave me what none of you ever did, dignity." The silence was heavy, but it was not cruel. It was the silence of realization, of change beginning to grow. The human placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. The people around them began to whisper again, but now their words carried awe, not scorn. That night, as the sun vanished and stars filled the sky, the story spread beyond the marketplace. In every corner of the colony, whispers carried the tale. A human stood for an alien girl. A human fought the caste. A human gave back what was stolen. And in the hearts of those who heard it, something shifted. Shame turned to reflection, and reflection turned to courage. The girl, once covered in garbage and stripped of her dignity, was no longer just a broken outcast. She was living proof that even in the darkest cruelty, one act of defiance could light a fire that no one could put out. By his side, she walked out of the square, no longer trembling, no longer small. For the first time, she believed she was worth more than her brand, more than her shame. And beside her, the human knew the truth. Sometimes a single stand could change everything. Sometimes, even in a world that tried to erase it, dignity could be rescued, and from that rescue, legends were born.